Great to have a batch which is so enthusiastic about product management. I always love talking about product management. I've been doing it for more than 10 years and absolutely love every day about it. So, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about product manager as a mini CEO, sort of a cliched thing if you've been in this domain for a while. So, let's get started. Um, let's first do this. Why should you listen to me? Right. So, hi, my name is Dharmesh Gandhi. I have 15 years of industry experience, out of which, 10 is in product management, product marketing, as well as leadership. Right. I'm currently at Uber, where I'm leading product management for AdTech based out of India. I've been based out of Bangalore for almost all my career. So, I've been in product management both in B2B and B2C companies. So I know sort of how different, how product management sort of works in various different types of companies, right? Also in, advertising, marketing, as well as smartphone products. So various different types of experiences. So I think I know a bit about how things work. Good. One more important thing, both successes and failures. It's important to fail as well. I think you'll soon realize that as product managers, we fail more than we succeed. And I think it's important to keep learning from that. Cool. I think I skipped a bit. Yeah. So this is what we'll cover, right? So firstly, we'll just set the context about the topic itself, right? There's some controversy about, product manager as a mini CEO. People believe that one is, hey, product managers are mini CEOs, and then there's another school of thought which says, hey, that doesn't make sense. Product manager is not the CEO of anything, right? So firstly, we'll go into the whole nitty gritty of the topic itself, right? Then we'll sort of go into the depth of the topic as to, hey, why are we talking about, or why do we need product managers who are mini CEOs? Because they need not be. In many cases, they are not, right? So why do we need these type of people? And if you are a guy who sort of recognizes yourself as someone who's fitting the profile, right? What are the ingredients of a guy who sort of operates like a mini CEO, right? Yeah, yeah. Then we'll take through a case study. This is my own study, one of my experiences. So we'll walk through that, and I'll call out what my learnings have been in that. And finally, I'll also give a brief about, what different type of product managers are there, what I call PM archetypes. Again, it's very important to firstly understand how different types of product managers are. And do you, as someone who is a budding PM, do you recognize yourself sort of biasing more towards one type of archetype versus the other? And that'll have a huge bearing in terms of what type of roles, what type of companies you go for. Good. Right. So let's start. Where did this whole thing start? PM is referred to as this mini CEO. Right? There's this guy called Ben Horowitz who leads a VC firm called Anderson Horowitz, a guru in the product management domain, and he says that, hey, good product managers should take complete responsibility of the success and the failure of the product. To the extent that there are guys who believe that I don't care how you operate as a product manager, as long as your product is a success, you are a success, right? So essentially, it's sort of the mindset where, as a PM, I don't care what you do, just get the shit done, right? You are as good as your product is, right? And a lot of thinking has gone behind that sort of a mindset. Essentially, it's saying, take complete ownership of all the things that go with making a product successful, right? So that is what I would call if that's one key takeaway from this whole session. It's about, hey, what can you do to make the product successful? I'm not talking about what are the skills needed in terms of making the product successful. It's more of a mindset shift. A product manager can never say, hey, this is not my job, or this is not something that I'm concerned about. You'll be concerned about each and everything about your product if it matters, right? yes, you will obviously rely on various people to get things done. But finally, as a PM, it's very important that you are concerned about each and every aspect that makes your product successful or not. So I think that's sort of the source of this. Why I said that there is a controversy. There are people, there are different schools of thought, right? And you'll soon realize that I have a bias myself. So that's fine. So there's guys like McKinsey who say, you know what, unlike PMs of the past who were primarily focused on execution, right? Nowadays we are saying PMs are increasingly the mini CEO, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But essentially it says that there are various aspects that go into making a product successful, including all the various decisions like, hey, what are the customers thinking about? Is it about more like time to market? What's the competition doing? Etc. So essentially you have to rally the entire organization to make it successful, right? On the other hand, there are guys like Martin Erickson, again, a very respected guy in the industry, right? He says, unless you're the founder of the, and product manager at the same time, you are not the CEO of anything, right? And there are reasons why he calls that out as well. Essentially, he's saying that, hey, as a CEO, right, you have a lot of direct control and authority over what happens, right? You are actually involved in hiring of all the functions, right? Or you're directly responsible for each of these functions. Product manager in almost all organizations will not be directly responsible for any of these or won't have direct authority, right? So it's like he has the responsibility, but not the authority. So, and which is, right? So I would say none of these are correct completely. The thought process which is going on behind this whole topic. So let's call out, what's the key takeaway here? We are saying that as a product manager, ownership is one of the key things that you have to bring to the table, right? And I would say it's a combination of, one is of course, which is at the center of it, customer empathy, right? So you have to understand and actually empathize with the customer. Finally, whatever the data says, if your customer doesn't like it, it doesn't work out, right? So that customer empathy aspect has to come in. But beyond that, it's also the passion. Do you actually care about it enough to do whatever is needed to get it successful, right? And you would soon realize as you keep seeing folks who are successful and folks who are not successful, one of the key drivers would be that there are guys who are successful do bring a lot of passion to the job, right? They go about, it could be as simple as actually going out and interviewing various different customers, listening to sales calls, listening to customer support folks, etc. There are guys who say, hey, I don't have a designer, let me just make the design myself, right? So there is a lot of passion which goes behind the folks, and believe me, passionate product managers inspire the whole team. So that's a very critical part of this whole thing. I almost call them like sort of mini, cheerleaders or whatever. The other aspect which is sort of I called about is just get it done, right? So essentially, if you were to call out a few things, right? A good product manager is not going to give excuses, right? They're not going to say, hey, sorry, it's not my job, or this guy goofed up. Doesn't matter. You cannot give excuses. Yes, there will be problems, there will be obstacles, but you just have to figure out what's the way forward and take the whole team along. Right. So let's go to the next step, which is, why do you need a PM who is like a mini CEO, right? So if you see, there's this whole gamut of the number of functions that a product manager sort of has to work with, right? Now, if you see each of these, it's very easy for someone who is actually not thinking like a CEO to actually skip some of these and say, hey, I'm just going to be responsible for the backlog of my engineering team, right? By the way, your backlog is not going to make your product successful, right? Your customers are going to make your product successful, right? Whether you have you thought about your financials, right? So you have the finance team which is there, right? Are you working closely with the R&D team, or is the R&D team sort of going in a completely tangential direction, right? Are you completely aligning everyone? So it's like you have to take everyone along, right? Let's take an example of operations as well. I'm working with Uber right now. So operations is a huge part of how we make Uber successful, right? So for instance, if in a particular area there are lesser drivers than riders, right? That's a very impactful thing, because the riders will be requesting for cabs, which I'm sure everyone realizes here, and there are not enough cabs in the area, right? You'll try 2 or 3 times, and the time you'll just say, "Hey, Uber," right? So there, I just lost a customer. Doesn't matter if I would have probably strictly conceived a great experience, for instance, right? Doesn't matter. Finally, the operations sucked in those cases. So that has a huge impact in terms of how we think about everything, or how successful or unsuccessful the product is, right? So a PM is going to be responsible for complete ownership, and uh, also is going to orchestrate various functions here. So that's sort of one of the reasons why we are looking for a guy who acts like a CEO, right? Just a call out, right? What's the difference here compared to a CEO? The guy is not going to have complete authority, right? In fact, in all cases, he will not be the sole decision maker. So he will have to evangelize his ideas. He'll have to ensure that everyone buys into it, actually buys into it, and is operating like a single team, right? So it's going to be a lot of hard work for sure. Um, and I can say that even more because in organizations which are sort of spread out, right, it's even worse, because then there is a huge tendency that there will be people who will be working in silos, right? Which would essentially mean that regardless of what you might have put in your slides or in your documents, it will not materialize on the ground. So what are you looking for? Basically, you need someone who understands the customers, who understands the business, who understands the tech, right? Not completely, but enough to be able to be the guy who can sort of rally everyone together, right? So I'm sort of always think of the PM as this guy. Just kidding. No, it's hard work in that sense, right? But yeah, you would like to hire someone like this guy who can do all of these various functions, or rather coordinate everything together, so that we are shipping successful products. Cool. So what I would do is, instead of getting all theoretical about it, right, let me take you guys through a case study. So I was with Amazon for around 4 years, right, and let me take you through my experience. I think that'll be the best way to sort of articulate, where are the situations where a PM acts like a mini CEO, right, and what are my learnings which I can convey to you. Cool. So let's start with when I had joined around 2014, right? The strategic context back then was that Amazon internally just called out that, hey, we want to be number 3 in advertising. Of course, number 1 was Google and number 2 was Facebook, right? So it's sort of, that was the context, and it in its own way, it was a big, hairy, audacious goal, right? Saying, hey, we want to be number 3 in advertising. This was strategic to retail as well, because retail, as you know, is a very low margin business, right? And the idea behind this was that, hey, Amazon is sort of creating like a platform, and we can have all of these various things which are eventually going to drive profits, right? So advertising was one of the key drivers to it, and I think now sitting here, we can all sort of call out, yes, that probably strategy did work out very well so far, right? So here the thinking was that, hey, Amazon can eventually be an advertiser, which anyways it's sort of advertising across all these, but it will also be a publisher where it can allow advertisers to advertise on Amazon's properties, right? And the key part here, or the key thing here, was that data was going to be critical to advertising, as it's going to be. So everyone knows that, at least as far as products are concerned, right, a lot of people, almost like 50% of the folks in US start their product searches on Amazon, right? So from that perspective, it has a huge advantage because it has intent as the key thing, right? So that was the whole strategic context. There is another aspect which was there, where Amazon was very, very concerned about Google, right? It wanted to reduce its dependence on Google to the extent possible because, I mean, I don't know, people who know Hindi, 36 ka aakda hota hai with Google. So there's always this turf war with Google, and to an extent, a lot of different companies it will have these tiffs with. So the other context was that how do we reduce our dependence on Google and anyone else in terms of traffic? So now that was the context where in which I had come in, right? So I actually joined the affiliates team back then, and I was sort of continuously interacting with all the various publishers, and we had a few products out there as well. I started to analyze the data as well as started to talk to publishers a lot. And I did realize that, keeping this strategic context in mind, there is a unique opportunity that we have, right, in terms of Amazon going directly to the publishers. When I say publishers, these are websites like, think of, androidcentral.com or cnet.com. Right? These are websites which are really focused on writing about product, right? So these are guys, these are website users who are researching about products day in, day out, right? Very high intent traffic which is coming to these sites. And I said, let's conceptualize a product which can, drive traffic to Amazon, as well as there are advertisers who are currently looking to advertise on Amazon. We can also allow them to advertise on these publisher websites, right? So now we sort of analyzed hundreds of publisher sites and placements and interacted with multiple publishers. So, and explored different types of ads. And one of the offerings that I conceptualized was what we called sort of native shopping ads, which appear at the end of a website. I don't know if you guys would have seen these, but it's mostly for US consumers. We don't have that many content sites in India for it to be an attractive proposition, right? So luckily, this particular thing did get an approval. So this was what I would call more like a startup within Amazon. And this is one good thing, by the way, with Amazon. Even though I'm not with Amazon right now, I'm a big fan in terms of how it operates, right? It allows you to actually come up with various ideas. And if it deems that this is a great one, it does have potential, it will sort of seed you internally and allow you to sort of grow the thing and see how it works out, right? A lot of successes have happened very, very bottoms up in that sense, and a lot of failures as well. But it doesn't shy away from betting on new products or businesses. So I would say that's one good thing where we put up a proposal, got an approval to take it to beta and start the validation process. So around 3 or 4 months into the validation, we started getting very good results, some very good publisher feedback. So we had some good sort of quotes coming in as well, where some of the sites were very, very happy about the type of results that we were seeing. Now we were very sort of picky about the type of sites that we went about. In fact, we had the advantage of a lot of data which Amazon had access to. So we did know where things will work and where, very importantly, where it will not work, right? Because we don't want to go ahead and play it not to sort of Amazon's strengths, right? So we knew that, where is Amazon strong in terms of consumers wanting to come to Amazon, as well as the type of sites where we will find great intent. Right? So we got some basic funding of, me, a couple of engineers and a UX designer, and we got started with that. So how would I sort of lay out the entire product journey, right? So I would just break it out. And this is like over around 4 years or so, right? I would say the first phase of this whole product journey was, really getting the core team in place, building the MVP, and getting the whole concept validated with these publishers. And we had some very strict KRAs for ourselves, saying, hey, we have to reach these many, this is the performance target, right? Because our publishers have to be happy. Finally, they are concerned about money. So do they earn enough money, right? Importantly, do we think Amazon can make enough money by doing this? So we would be able to establish our final business case, right? We had sort of numbers which are up in the air, right? But at the end of 1 year, we had to establish that, hey, is this going to make sense or not? And based on that, either we were going to kill the thing or double down on it. So at the end of it, we had select publishers who were very happy. We hit our performance targets and we said, hey, let's get the funding for the next stage, right? At which point we started hiring, we got the funding for the next stage, started hiring folks both in engineering as well as marketing. And marketing sort of came later. So we had more product managers, engineering, BI, and sort of built it up to a team of 40. But we had a lot of work which we had to do on the product itself. So it was like a gradual build up, both in terms of how we built out our product offering, in terms of the capabilities that we were building out. But we had to ensure that our go-to market was in sync with the product that we were building, because we cannot sort of just open it up to everyone. We knew the product had limitations, so we had to sort of gradually open it up to the folks where it worked the best, right? So it was sort of a gradual roll up over around 2 years or so, right? Where we kept optimizing the yield, started plugging the gaps, and kept expanding the list of publishers. At which point, around 1.5, 2 years into it, we completely opened it up and said, hey, I think this is the time when we can now go big with this particular product offering, right? That's the point where we started hiring marketing and sales folks as well, right? In fact, we also had customer success folks where there are people whom these guys would work with to make the product successful, help with the integration, etc. Right? We also started to integrate with the sellers and the vendors network, where as we gained substantial scale, we started allowing advertisers like sellers and vendors to start advertising on these, right? What that did was, Amazon was not the only one who was sort of bidding on these slots, but we have Amazon as a retailer, plus sellers, vendors, all of these guys who had the opportunity to bid for these placements, right? What that also did is, Amazon, which was so far in terms of its advertising revenue, was only reliant on advertising on, let's say, search placements on Amazon.com, for instance, right? It now had an additional inventory. So that became like a huge opportunity for them, because earlier they were restricted by that as the opportunity size. Now they suddenly had a lot more where they could sort of advertise, right? And it improved from a publisher's perspective, it improved the performance as well significantly, right? So suddenly they had more people bidding for the same set of slots. So their performance numbers also went up, which implied that more publishers started to become interested in this offering, right? So it's essentially why I'm taking you through this is, it's a journey which just takes time, and you have to keep doing this, right? Of course, it's seems very nice and linear, right? What I'm not telling you is there are a lot of ups and downs, and we are constantly questioned, saying, hey, should we do this? Should we not do this? Right? So there's this whole ups and downs which does happen and will happen with any sort of product journey, right? Now, let's call out, what are the main learnings? How does this tie back to the topic at hand, right? So, what worked in this case, right? So firstly, conceptualization and etc. Firstly, you need a lot of executive support for you to be able to do this, for you to be able to operate like a CEO. Your organization structure should allow you to do that, right? Otherwise, it's difficult, right? If you're sort of, and there are a lot of organizations where I have been there, where it just doesn't allow you enough freedom to operate like a CEO, right? So it's like, hey, you're only supposed to do X, Y, Z, right? Don't worry about anything else, right? So very critical to have, something like this. Secondly, build the right team in place. Very important. Without the right team, you will not be able to execute. Even though you're a product manager, be mindful of the type of people that are being hired in all the other functions as you're building out the team. So if engineers are being hired, you have to be clear saying, hey, this is my 3-year vision. Let's build out the engineering team so that we are building out the capabilities for this, let's say, next 2 years or 3 years, right? Because that's the core team which is going to continue to work on it, and that's going to be critical, right? Thirdly, have like a big bold vision to keep your team excited and motivated, because you might not be getting the right results right now, but they have to believe that you will get the right results later on, right? You have to get them excited. You have to rally the team around. So very important, both in terms of calling out, saying, hey, this is where I see this, 2 years or 3 years down the line. It's important to call that out. Plus have enough of these intermediate milestones so that everyone knows that yes, you are going in the right direction, right? Including the executive as well, saying, hey, this is where I think if we are hitting these set of our intermediate milestones, 1 year to 1.5 years, 2 years, then I think we are in the right direction. Build the right relationships, right? In a large company, that's even more important, where all of these various folks are going to be working, and they need to know that they are working on the right side of things. They need to be aligned, because they'll, in many cases like sales, finance, which could be supporting multiple products, they also need to believe that your product is going to serve their selfish needs, right? So they need to know that, hey, I'm going to get something out of this, right? What I've seen works best is get personal relationships going, right? That really helps. Finally, I think this is very critical. Try to be responsible for the revenue as well as the CP or profitability. If you have ownership over those set of things, then yes, you will be able to act like a mini CEO. Call out, it's not going to be easy as your things really start to scale. As most of the organizations get larger, you do have to split the responsibilities, right? As you split the responsibilities, ownerships get split, right? Hence, operating like a mini CEO gets a lot more difficult, right? So org design is critical to continue to ensure that your PMs can work as mini CEOs, right? Now, so the key takeaway from that, we do need to empower the PMs, ensure that they have the right, let's call it the right org design, or the right executive support, the right set of, let's say, organization support, I would call. In some cases, the PMs are smart enough to be able to do that. In some cases, they also need help in ensuring that they can achieve their maximum potential, right? So let's see how much time we have. I think we have good enough time. What I'll do is, at this point, where we talked about one type of mode in which a product manager might work, product management is not all the same. So what I did was, just based on my experience, I sort of called out saying, hey, what are the 4 or 5 different archetypes of product managers, right? So here are the 5, and this may not be an exhaustive one, but I sort of divided into 5 different types of product managers. Business product manager, right? Algorithmic and data PM, consumer experience PM, platform PM, and growth PM, right? And we'll just go through each of these 5 and try to see if in your orgs, are you able to identify if there are guys who are sort of behaving in a certain manner, and can you map these folks? And by the way, there could be guys who are operating like 2 or 3 of these as well. There could be a combination as well. And in your career, it's very likely that you'll probably operate as at least in 2 or 3 of these modes. So it's not like you have to just take one and stick to that, right? So a business product manager, really brings in that general manager type of a hat to the product, where the person would be balancing the customer value and the business viability, right? So this guy will be a great, cross-team collaborator, can work with finance, engineering, everyone together, right? In many cases, by the way, there are drawbacks as well. You will see that this sort of a guy will not be diving deep into every nitty-gritty of the detail of the product, right? So a guy who's typically acting as this would have some support in terms of, there could be roles like product owners as well, who would be executing on a day-to-day basis, who will help out a business product manager. Right? So this is sort of one set of guys. Typically, I've seen this sort of a role. Let's call out in Nokia. I had a business product manager who was supposed to go out and work with, or was responsible for launching phones. And then we had product owners, or I don't know, requirement managers. There are different types of roles which are there, which were responsible for one particular component of the system, right?
Right now we call it technical product managers.
Okay, yeah. Which company? Nokia. It used to be technology managers, requirements managers. I mean, they've changed the name multiple times. Nowadays, this is another one which is coming up in a big way, and you would see that this is very typical with internet companies. So algorithmic or data product managers, these guys are typically very, very, well, as the name suggests, data focused. So an example would be someone who is responsible for the search experience so here it's all about, you're not going ahead and going out and talking to people saying, hey, you just searched for this. Are these the right set of products? Right? You are relying on what are the click-through rates, the conversion rates, right? What is the relevance of the products that are being shown, right? So this is sort of another type of a guy. Again, this guy would typically be very good in terms of customer empathy, which is coming innately. So you don't have to go out and actually ask for it, right? He wears that customer hat, but is able to translate that into data as well, right? So the third one, consumer experience product manager. Again, very typical with, let's call out an example here, right? So let's say the experience of a smartphone would be, someone who has to define that would be a good example of a consumer experience type of a product manager. Or there are even guys who have to design the front end of a website, right? So typically these sort of guys are feature creators by nature, very, very obsessed about each and every detail of how the experience needs to be. People who are responsible for improving, let's say, the conversion rate funnel, right? So they would be looking at the consumer experience, but of course, ensure that they're continuously thinking about, hey, how does this impact in terms of the data, right? Fourth one, growth product manager, right? So this, these are guys who are typically come in next, find MVP of your product. It's become fairly large, and now you suddenly have the need to have people dedicatedly responsible for growing it, right? So we have in Uber dedicated teams saying, hey, this guy is responsible for rider growth. This guy is responsible for driver growth, right? Now this could mean multiple things. This could mean, in case of Uber, that how do we come up with products which will get us the next billion users, right? It could mean how do we define a data-driven marketing function which can get the right message to the right user at the right time, right? Using all the various channels. So essentially anything and everything responsible about growing the product, right? So this, if you see, where's the what are the type of folks who will be best suited for this? These sort of guys love identifying, what are the key levers, how do you work with data, how do you improve the product growth, right? So in fact, we've seen guys who have been marketers in the past being very well suited for a role like this. And lastly, we have folks like platform product managers. These are typically very inbound type of roles, where you have platform products where you're creating technology and products which are being used internally, right, by your own teams, right? So these won't be outbound type of products. So let's take an example here. Again, if you take the same example of Nokia, for instance, right? So you have smartphones which are being shipped, and then you have Symbian as a operating system, as a platform which was powering that. Now we have Windows as a platform which is powering all of these, right? So you'll have platform product managers who are doing all of these, and typically they'll have to work with other product managers or other folks to get the outbound set of requirements. But if you see the key set of folks, or the key value add that they're bringing in, is they're able to manage the complexity really well. The complexity of working in an organization, have contradictory requirements coming in from various places, and then still be able to simplify things for the team, for the engineering team, for all the other stakeholders, and ensure that there is sort of a seamless way they are moving. Right. So, yeah, I think that is all that I had on this. Questions? Enough of me talking. Yes. In the same org, you can have different type of PMs. So yeah, your question was?
You cannot say that
No, there is no good or bad here. It is what the organization needs, firstly, and you yourself have to identify, saying, hey, do you have a bias towards one type of a role or another, right? So that way you will probably be able to best identify, saying, hey, do I think I should be in this role or not, as a, in terms of whether it interests you or not. So I think it's more, I just put this out essentially to bring out that point. I will.
The question is about we have just seen the personas or the personas of the PM. So in these ones, there will be some portions of the business model canvas which each and every personas might have to forego and concentrate on few of the much needed ones. So is there any industry, a specific industry or industry segment, or any specific companies wherein all the business model canvases aspects are being worked on by a PM? Because as you just told that PM is kind of a mini CEO. So if at all he is a mini CEO, he might have to actually work on all the particular aspects in the business model canvas. So what is your take on that? And do we have any particular industry or any company which is kind of giving opportunities to the PMs like that?
Okay, so I think a lot of questions in that. So let's try one by one. Firstly, you were saying something about business models. Can you clarify on that first?
With respect to business model canvas, so that
business
is what
model canvas.
Yes.
Can you elaborate?
So we would have a lot of this is what has been taught to us as part of the MBA program in the IPL. So this is the major concentration. So in the business model canvas, we would have the customer segment, and we would have the value propositions, and we would have the key partners, key activities, and key resources, cost model, cost revenues, revenue model, and all such stuffs.
Yeah.
But as part of these are all the kind of major activities done by the PM. But all these personas individually work on some of these aspects of. Question was that is there any particular industry or any the statement, if you say that the PM is like a mini CEO, then he should be actually working.
Yes, you're right. So as I called out, right, PM, you do want PMs who would act like mini CEOs, but the context of the companies may not allow them to operate as mini CEOs, right? That's why one of the things which I said is empower your PMs, right? So it's a very loaded statement. So, but when I said empower your PMs, do you structure your organization such that a PM is able to operate like a mini CEO? Because that's when you'll be able to get the best out of the guy, right? That said, as organizations get larger, right, it's difficult to have one guy do all, right? If you're able to split the org, for instance, in a way that there are PMs responsible for a set of things end to end, that's great, right? But what I've seen is it's easier said than done, right? Unless you're able to, let's call it this way. Let's take an example again, right? So within Uber, for instance, right? I mean, initially when it was started out, we had one set of guys who were responsible for the whole of rider experience, driver experience, marketplace, the entire balance, etc., and all things related to that, including growth, right? Now, as the organization, right, we have one team which is responsible for rider, one team which is responsible for driver. Forget the eats part, etc. That's separate. One team which is responsible, when I say team, product management, right? Team which is for marketplace, saying, hey, we need to have a balance between rider and driver, right? There's another guy who is responsible for maps, right? There's another guy who is responsible for growth, right? There's a data platform product management as well, right? There's an ad tech product management as well. So what I'm saying is easier said than yes. For instance, I would love for one guy to be able to think and operate like a mini CEO, but as organizations scale, it is not easy to structure your org correspondingly, right? So answer there. This is something which every organization does grapple with, every leader does grapple with in terms of how do I design the thing such that, I can have my product managers get excited about solving problems end to end, because it does get a lot to handle, right? Each of these things are very challenging problems to solve, right? And not some difficult to ask, let's say, one person to handle everything about rider, driver, things, right? It's difficult to have one person solve everything.
Yeah. So, to extension to that, if at all you're working for a startup, you most probably have opportunity
Yes.
to that. But you also mentioned that you'd have opportunities in Amazon, wherein we can actually be like a mini
Not all
startup.
parts of Amazon, by the way.
Okay. Fine.
Yes. It's best if but I do think you have to probably mix it up a bit. Have a good mix of established companies as well as startups, right? With established companies, you will probably learn how things will be probably in a mature stage. You'll learn from other experienced folks how the teams are operating. And in a startup, it's actually so let's firstly clarity, right? It's not about just rolling out products, right? Firstly, it's also about how do you define the KPIs, right? In some cases, the KPI may not be about rolling out products, but actually deprecating products, right? So the organization might want to define the PM or PM orgs. But I would say, yes, anything and everything to do with the success or failure of the product is generally how you should define it. And in some cases, in translating it to revenue or profitability, right? As we were going through the archetypes, you would have realized that there are people, example of mine works in Shaadi.com, right? So they did is they just broke up the entire product team, with each PM being responsible for each individual KPI. So they just broke it up into various stages in the funnel through which every prospect sort of comes in and says, this guy is responsible to increase the conversion rate from X to Y stage in the funnel, right? This guy is responsible for Y to Z stage in the funnel, right? So, I think there is a lot of context which has to go in terms of how do you design the org as well, saying, hey, this is what works for this organization. And
it also boils down to the number of users of the existing product as well. Bigger companies and bigger organizations. So maybe one product is already existing to buy something, but a product manager's role may be to define and generate new features on that existing product.
Yeah. You would love, because it makes it very easy for you to, of course, think like a business owner as well. But it is not always the case. Yeah, it varies. Every org it is different, right? In some orgs, like in case of Uber, product management doesn't own the P&L, right? We have in general managers who are owning the P&L, right? So the product managers are not, right? So that's why every organization operates differently. In fact, within the same organization as well, you could have teams which are operating differently. So yeah, I would say yes. As a PM, I would love to own the P&L. It makes it easier for me or much more interesting for me.
How do you differentiate the roles and responsibilities of the portfolio manager and the product manager?
Generally, the portfolio managers are guys who are leading the product management team. It could be different, but generally that's the case, right? Again, various companies, I know Nokia probably operates a bit differently, a very highly matrixed structure. But yeah.
So, we talked about creative. So, the cases like that, how do you measure ROI on your group, say, your partner?
So that's one of the things that as a PM, as soon as you come in to a particular role, you have to define, hey, this is how I'm going to measure the success for myself and for the product, for instance, right? So in some cases, for instance, imagine that you're a platform PM, as we called out, right? You have to define what your KPIs are. Now that becomes very challenging because, hey, I just made this and this thing became faster. What is the final impact? So it's not easy, by the way, right? So it's very important to define that KPI, ensure that you're focusing on the right set of KPIs, and people are actually concerned about it, and hence figure out what the right level of investment is. So
yes. When you talk about growth, some of it is tangible, some of it is
growth should be tangible. Yeah. So if you're saying a growth PM, then yes, he should have very direct impact on the final revenue or profitability, right? So for instance, we said growth PMs who are working very closely with the marketing function, right, would have very direct impact on, let's say, hey, what is my cost of acquisition, for instance, right? And let's say that is a key KPI. Can I bring it down from X to Y, right? So that's a very direct impact on the profitability. So yeah, very important to define the right KPIs and focus on the right ones. Yeah. Yeah, substantially different, I would say. In B2B, you do have customers who can actually clearly articulate what they want, right? But interestingly, you are also dependent on their success for your product to be successful, right? So my experience was with NDS, which was later acquired by Cisco, right? Where we used to supply software to guys like Tata Sky and Bharti Airtel, all of these guys, right? So as today, if you see, their businesses are going down. So obviously that particular business unit's revenues are going down, right? Not because the products were great or not great, etc., just because of what's happening in the industry. So from that perspective, it is important as a B2B product manager, not just to be actually asking your customers what they want, right? Because in this case, you can actually go and ask them, but also be able to educate them that, hey, this is how you should be probably investing in the next growth phase, right? Saying, be the thought leader for these set of folks, right? And continue to say, hey, this is supposed to be your roadmap. Hey, I've seen this set of guys, these set of customers of mine be very successful doing this. Why don't you do this, etc. So be the thought leader, evangelize, and probably that could make you successful. B2C, the key challenge is you don't have someone who is directly telling you, hey, this is what I need, right? So there is a huge level of risk or assumption, etc., that you go out to the market with in many cases, right? You will obviously do your market study, etc., but there is the whole validation process which is there, the market validation process which is there, which is very different from what you would see at in a B2B space where, for instance, you can always get a lead customer and say, hey, if I build this, will you buy this? At least that guy, yeah, he may or may not buy, but there is a guy who is saying that, yes, I'm going to take this. On the other hand, in case of B2C, you can do your alpha, beta stages, etc. But finally, it's a huge risk in terms of you might see a good growth initially, right? And suddenly you'll find that, hey, your product was actually good only for that segment. And it's no longer as big as you thought it would be. So yes, significantly different also in terms of how you organize your entire org, for instance. In case of B2B, you'll obviously have a huge sales org. In many cases, the sales org tends to be very powerful, right? So it becomes like a sales engineering driven company rather than a product driven company. In case of B2C, generally B2C companies are very, very product driven companies. Mainly because, hey, if it doesn't work out, generally, it's not like you have a sales org which can just go out and sell anything and everything. So I hope so that answers. Yeah. Amazon's use case was actually a slightly easier one in this case because Amazon already sells a lot of products out in the market, and in that sense, in a way, we had a ready source of ad, so to say, when we went to the market, right? So we just had to convince the internal marketing team to say, hey, if I launch this, would you be funding this? And they just had to say yes, a blanket yes, as long as you are meeting these set of performance criteria, I'm all good, right? So that said, with Uber, let's get to the question. I mean, I think Uber could be a good example of a multi-sided platform, right? Uber Eats is probably an example where we have 3 players involved. So let's take that example. Let's take where we have riders and drivers. I know people would probably already relate to this, but what Uber did in this case was, in most of these cases, right, if you want to get riders on board, right, initially you have to have enough drivers coming into your system, right, so that the riders are interested, or as soon as they book a ride, they get a ride, right? So the person or the company who is able to do this as soon as possible or build out that network tends to be the winner in the longer run, right? Where you have both riders and drivers in the eventual stage. But as you called out, right, the chicken and egg problem, how do you seed that initially, right? So multiple ways people do this. Very interesting one would be, in this case, just incentivize the guys like drivers, for instance, right? Enough saying there are even messages that we send out saying, hey, you will at least earn this much, right? And give out guarantees, right? So once you start giving out guarantees, you have all of these guys coming in, right? Now, it's easier said than done, but yes, typically you need deep pockets to be able to do that to start off. So that's one simple way. I'm sure there'll be multiple ways you can figure out in terms of how do you seed the marketplace.
Practically, maybe not related directly. We see that like whenever there's a rates diverse, we don't get the overall cash structure. How do you see that all getting from? This is a problem not only for the driver, but as well as for the
Who says we know how to do it? These are not easy problems to solve. I mean, there are no short-term solutions because finally these are, for instance, we cannot force our drivers to ride because it's a real problem, right? So if you
switch it off, right? That's what we
yeah, I mean, as a driver, who is going out I mean, would you like to be stuck in the rain, right? Would you like to spend 3 hours and hardly, make 200, 300 rupees? It doesn't make sense for them as well, right? So, they're also human beings. So, I mean, yes, we love to try out solving. So in the short term, typically what we try to do is you have these surge pricing, etc. Right? To, of course, in recently in Bangalore, well, not recently, there are all these regulations which have come in, which makes it difficult to do surge pricing beyond a point, right? So yeah, surge pricing is there. There is a cap on it. Yeah, it's as I called, it's a product journey. These are known problems. As I said, any other questions? I'm not responsible for it. I think it will be inappropriate for me to call out, but yeah, it does take safety of as something which is of paramount importance. Obviously, because if riders don't perceive Uber to be safe, they would not be riding, right? And on the other hand, we have, even in Latin America, it's the other way around. It's the drivers who don't feel safe. It's a very cash-based economy. So drivers because they get the payments in cash, so they carry a lot of cash with them and they get mugged. So it's the other way around there. But yeah, it's important. I'm sorry, I won't be able to comment on because I really don't know. Sorry, can you? Sued? Oh, okay. I'm sure it happens all the time. Yeah, you have to be careful. I think that as PMs, we've been trained on legal aspects as well in many cases. And generally, it's a very blanket one. Even when you're researching for things, typically you're asked for with saying, if you think that this is already in place, right, don't search for it. First, go to your legal team, right? If you think that this is, for instance, a patented idea and you are potentially going to be using it, go and search for it. So
generally, this kind of things will happen only if you are trying to copy it, patent it, right? But otherwise, somebody is already using one thing, but if they already put it as a copy.
But I mean, in general, there are a lot of cases where people do copy, and it's okay because see, Flipkart copied Amazon, but I'm sure Amazon would have copied a lot of other guys as well, right? So these are not really niche thing. In many cases, it sort of comes down to, are you able to execute well on it or not? Yeah. Yeah. And it is a complex topic, IP protection. Yeah.
It is like just related to trade for the rent or to the so one thing, so I don't know this slash you and then to then I feel somehow that I can to get file for some so like when I call up to where they like please ask that never completely safe
Yeah.
but still I have like
I'm pretty sure that the data doesn't get leaked because I think you have to realize these companies, they are very well-known companies. they cannot bear the reputation risk of, so the companies like Uber or any of these large companies, right? It's a huge reputation risk if you're going to do something like that. So, a few cents or dollars here and there is not worth it. So let's call it out that it's not worth what you're going to get out of that. Yes. Now, the key point as a product manager is as you're calling out, right? How do you ensure that customers don't even get that perception that your data is leaked, right? Yes, your data is not leaked and you're fine from a legal privacy perspective, right? But as a customer, for instance, you clearly call that out saying, hey, I think the data has been leaked, right? So a challenge for me as a product manager would be, how do I ensure that you have the right perception, right? That's also my problem. So yes, that's something that as a PM I should be worried about.